for inviting me to the School of Modern Mathematics and Theoretical Physics. Can you hear me? Or yes, no?
Can we turn it off?
There are two buttons. One says on.
Okay, is it working now?
That's better.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Peter, for inviting me to speak at the first Mesoamerican School on Modern Mathematics and Theoretical Physics. So, my domain of research is harmonic analysis. And in my lectures, I would like to discuss some relations of my domain of research with well, the main themes of this school, mainly Lie algebra, Lie groups, geometry, or the representation theory of Lie groups and their use in theoretical physics. And I will do that from the point of view I mainly know, meaning the point of view of an analyst. So the plan of the lectures are as follows. Today I will talk about what quantization means for me, to some extent. Tomorrow I would like to talk about some, well, the various aspects of harmonic analysis and how they relate with the subjects of the school. And the day after tomorrow I will talk about my recent work on the. So today I would like to discuss what it means to have a quantization. So of course, well, I don't want to enter into great technicalities. So I would like to have, well, to give a historical perspective on those questions. So what is quantization? So we have to start with Paul Dirac's PhD thesis. And his principle is a method of analogy, which was detailed in well, later in his book, The Principle of Quantum Mechanics. And so the question is how you go from classical Hamiltonian mechanics to quantum mechanics. And well, of course, well, it was well, mathematicians would prefer well the formulae which was given by Hermann Weyl a bit later in this article here. And if you're an analyst, you really much prefer the one given by Cohn and Nuremberg, well, in the 60s, following question, well, to somehow analyze partial differential equations. So let's start with the beginning. And follow well, what you do usually when you study quantum mechanics. First, you review the basics of Hamiltonian mechanics. So you are in R to N. You have what is called the state, which is just the vector where the first coordinates are the position vectors and the next coordinates are the momentum vectors. So here let's say that the mass is equal to 1, so the momentum is basically the velocity. So you do classical mechanics, so you start with Newton's laws, and equivalently, well, Newton's laws, so the acceleration is equal to the force, and in physics, in classical physics, force derived from potential, meaning the force is minus nabla V, where V is the potential. So from this second order ODE, ordinary differential equation, you write it as the first order differential equations. So you write Q dot equals P, and P dot, which is Q double dot equals minus grad of V. And you notice that you can give a spatial structure to those equations just by introducing what is called the Hamiltonian. And you notice that Q dot is the derivative with respect to P of the Hamiltonian, and P dot is minus the derivative of the Hamiltonian with respect to the positions. So the states here, S dot, is equal to, you have this equation here. So when you're in classical mechanics, observables are just functions of the positions and the momentum. And an important object that you have been hearing all about for 2 today and yesterday, is of course the Poisson bracket, which is this operation between two functions of P and Q. And this is a good thing to introduce, because if you look at a solution of Newton's law, so S of t satisfying this equation here, if you differentiate f of S of t with respect to time, so what you obtain when you look precisely, you obtain well, you just apply the chain rule. So you will obtain first the derivative of q with respect to f, the derivative of f with respect to q, times the derivative of s with respect to p, which is this thing here, plus the derivative of f with respect to q times the derivative of q with respect to t, which is this thing here. So all computation done, you realize that if you differentiate with respect to time f of s of t, you obtain that it is basically the Poisson bracket of f with your Hamiltonian here. And so it tells you that an observable is constant on the trajectories. So a function is constant on the trajectories if and only if its Lie bracket with the Hamiltonian is 0. And so one example is, of course, when you take as observable the Hamiltonian itself, and what you obtain is that h is constant on the trajectories, which you already knew because this is just a conservation of energy. Well, so of course you can have lots of interesting structures in this case. So if you look at the function of R2L, so the observables, equipped with the Lie bracket, they form a Lie algebra. Well, if you have an observable f, you associate the vector xf, which is given by this. So when f was equal to h, you obtain xh with this vector here with f equals h, which was exactly the one appearing here. So I will sometimes, so this is a good thing to introduce, the Hamiltonian vector associated to an observable. And I will often abuse slightly the notation when I want to talk about the solution of S dot equals x of f s. So if I want to talk about this, the solution of this equation for a given initial data, I will denote this by this very ill-defined notation, but like that. So I will denote so this denotes the local flow of this vector. Of course, well, after all the geometry you have, you see a vector, you identify it with a vector field, and you check easily that if you take this vector field, which is a differential operator, if you take the commutator of two of those vector fields for two different observables, what you obtain is the vector field corresponding to the Lie bracket. So another way of saying it is that this association of Hamiltonian vector to an observable, it's a Lie algebra homomorphism, and of course it doesn't see the constant. But, so let's compute some Lie brackets. So as observables, you just take the positions of your particle or the momentum of your particle, and you have what you can call the canonical commutation relation, meaning the Lie bracket of well, two positions or two momentum commute, but you have this relation here for two Lie bracket of basically they commute if you look at the momentum and the position of two different coordinates, but they are equal to 1 if they are associated, if it's the same coordinate. And so, well, if you are not in Rn, so if you are not considering position and momentum of n-dimensional particle, you usually, if you want to generalize that, usually what you consider the symplectic manifold. So I'm ashamed to say that I had prepared this slide without realizing that everybody was so familiar with the manifold, so in differential geometry. But so very roughly speaking, well, your manifold looks like R to N locally, and the local coordinate satisfies those can satisfy locally those commutation relations. And the good thing is that the local flow for any observable f preserves the symplectic structure, meaning that if I look at the local coordinates, if I look at the local coordinate of my symplectic manifold, and if I apply the Hamiltonian flow, there are also local coordinates satisfying CCRs. So if you want to even more generalize, if you want to generalize even more those types of things, you consider a Poisson manifold, where what matters is not really your manifold M, but more what happens when you consider the observables. You need to have a Poisson bracket, so meaning something which takes two functions and spits out another function and satisfies those three properties: anti-symmetry, Jacobi identity, and Leibniz rule. And so when you work out with it, it's not difficult to see that it is equivalent to say that your observables form a Lie algebra with your Lie brackets. And the last condition here says that this operation here, taking the Lie bracket with the fixed function f, is a vector field, so the Hamiltonian vector field associated to f, if you're in Rn first. So in quantum mechanics, at least when you see it with the principle of analogy, well, it has been it is. I'm sure you know it much better than I do, so I'm ashamed to present something so elementary. But so the quantum mechanics by the principle of analogy is saying, in quantum mechanics, in Hamiltonian mechanics, you have a state and you have which is just position and momentum, and you have observables which are real valued functions of your states. And what you want to have in quantum mechanics is the states will not be a point in R2N, but it will be a unit vector in a certain Hilbert space. It will be a unit vector in the space of square integrable functions. And I'm asking them to have norm 1 for the L2 norm. And what will be an observable in quantum mechanics is, it will be a self-adjoint operator on this Hilbert space. So in Hamiltonian mechanics, it's clear what the state is. Well, you know what the position of a particle is, and you know what its velocity is. But in quantum mechanics, a state doesn't have a physical meaning per se. What has a physical meaning is the probability density of the position in the state phi. So this is when you consider this quantity here. You don't consider phi, you don't consider phi, you consider phi of x squared, and you consider it as probability density. And the same for what also has meaning is if you take the Fourier transform of phi, and you do the same operation, you consider the square norm of f hat against Dixi. So this is the probability density of the momentum. So, I mean, the first time I've heard about that, why would you do that? And how do you interpret physically the observation? Basically, where does it come from? If, like me, you never really paid much attention to physics lectures in your first undergraduate years. So let's see some examples of observables to see how things make sense. So the basic example of quantum observables is the operators where you take a function on in your Hilbert space, so it's a function of Rn, and you multiply by by xj, which is just the GS coordinate. And clearly it is a self-adjoint operator because, well, it is very easy to check. Another example of quantum observables is, well, up to a constant. It's the derivative with respect to one of the coordinates. And it's not difficult to see that it is also self-adjoint. And you can just check that, because if you want to take to pass the derivation from here to here, you could just integrate by parts. But as I'm an analyst, I will use the Fourier transform, and I will just notice that if I take the Fourier transform of this operation, so if I apply this operator to a function psi, and then take the Fourier transform, what I obtain is just basically up to this constant multiplication by the Fourier variable psi j. So here are my conventions for this talk for the Fourier transform. And well, so here you are back to, well, so in the Fourier transform side, well, it's just a multiplication by psi j. So with the Blanchard formula, it's very easy then to check that the PG is self-adjoint. Well, now if I want to explain the link between these observable and their physical interpretation, I will need what is on the next slide, because for me, well, I might be a bit, well, I don't know, it's not because here I multiply by something which should be the position, and here on the Fourier side I multiply by something which should be the velocity, that I have interpreted anything. So if you want to interpret this quantum observable, you need to really understand, well, how this works. And for me, well, not for me, the way to understand this is to use the spectral theorem, also known as the spectral decomposition of the self-adjoint operator. So let's say that we have a self-adjoint operator on a Hilbert space. So the spectral theorem tells you that it is in one-to-one correspondence with the projection valued measures on the Hilbert space. So let's take a deep breath. If you have never seen it, I have an example which, I mean, with funny notation, I mean, you already know. And if you have seen it, well, it's a lot of words for things which are quite natural. So let's see what this theorem says in finite dimension. So you're considering your Hilbert space of finite dimension, so it's Cn, and you're considering your self-adjoint operator on Cn. So this means that you have a Hermitian n by n matrix. And it's well known that the Hermitian matrix is diagonalizable in an orthonormal basis. So, and that all its eigenvalues are real. So if you look at your operator A, you can say that on each eigenspace, you just multiply by lambda j, the eigenvalue lambda j. So another way, a horrible way of writing it, is that you just integrate lambda against this sum of Dirac measured value, well, sort of multiplied but valued into the projection of the projection onto the eigenspaces of A. And the spectral theorem says that this is true for any Hilbert space, whether your Hilbert space is finite or infinite dimension. And it is true for any self-adjoint operator, whether your self-adjoint operator is bounded or unbounded. And it is true for any type of spectrum. Here you have a finite number of eigenvalues because you are in Cn. But if your Hilbert space is infinite dimensional, your spectrum might be continuous, or it might have some bits which are discrete, some bits which are continuous. But so this is the spectral theorem is a very general theorem which tells you that if you take the self-adjoint operator A on H on any Hilbert space, you can write it here as the integral of lambda against a measure which is valued into the projection of your Hilbert space. And so this is a result of functional analysis, and it is due to von Neumann at some point in the first part of the 20th century.
In the case of infinite dimension, should be separable?
Well, all my Hilbert spaces are supposed to be separable. I'm doing quantum mechanics, so all my Hilbert spaces are supposed to assumed to be separable. So separable meaning that it has a countable dense number of points, or it admits finite. It admits a countable base, orthonormal basis. Yes, I should say. I will talk about so tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I will talk about representation theory and representations. Whenever I talk about Hilbert spaces, they will always be assumed to be separable. So let's see what it means on QG. So QG was just a multiplication by xj on our space L2 of Rn. And when you think about it, well, it's not as if you could say that there is one eigenvalue. You can't say, oh, I take one eigenvalue. It doesn't work like that. You have to take a bunch of eigenvalues, let's say a subset capital lambda here. And what I say is that the functions have eigenvalues in this set capital lambda if basically they are 0 if xj is outside of lambda. So basically, if they have a support, if their support, so basically if there was only one variable, it would be like the support is included in lambda. So you check easily that all the eigenvalues of QG, the spectrum of QG is R, and that if you consider the projection on the orthogonal onto those spaces, which just, when you look at what it means, it's just multiplying a function by the indicatrix of these things, you multiply by the function which is 1 when xj is in lambda and 0 when xj is outside of lambda, then well, you have completely decomposed your operator QJ. So for me, when I read the physics literature, QG in itself doesn't have any physical meaning. But when I look at its spectral projections, well, oh, sorry, here it's a lambda. So when I look at the spectral projections, this has a meaning. So if I look at the spectral projection at a function phi against the function phi for the L2 inner product, well, it's very easy to check that this is just the integration of phi squared on when xj is in lambda. And so this is interpreted physically. So this is just due to what we have worked out here, the spectral decomposition of QJ. So this is mass. But physically, it is interpreted as the probability that the GS coordinate of the particle will be found in the set capital lambda for the state phi. And so this thing here, it takes a set and it gives you a number. So this is a probability, and if you, as a set, you take R, you obtain 1 because phi is the state. So this is a probability measure. So if you take its mean value, so if you just integrate this lambda against